Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest Faster Project panel session webinar. So today we're going to be looking at the way that the project has panned out in Scotland. Obviously, we have the three regions of the Faster project. We've got Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and the rural west coast of Scotland. And we're going to look at the entire process from consortium building right the way through to the chargers that are being installed, the lessons that have been learned along the way, and what's next in Scotland with the Faster project and with EV charging in general. But as always, we'll start off with an update on the overall Faster project. So I'll hand over to Donal.
Thanks, Euan. Morning, folks. Good to see so many of you able to join us again this morning. We're in the final series of our webinars now at the moment. So we'll be wrapping up with 2 further webinars in November. But just to give you a very quick update on some of the work that we've been doing here at Southwest College over the past few weeks since our last webinar. We had our regional roadshow here in Enniskillen on Saturday, the 23rd of September. So that was a really enjoyable day. We had quite a number of stakeholders and members of the public here for the event. We had a series of panel discussion sessions that were hosted by Andrew Benfield from Cenex and Caroline Kidd. And I think from the discussions and the feedback, everybody in attendance found those very, very useful that day. So it was great to see such positivity and support for the project and the work that we've been doing. Also, over the past number of weeks, I've been working again with Andrew and the team at Cenex on a new strategy project in association with local authorities in the 3 project regions. And through the Faster project, we're delighted that we are able to support the local authority associate partners with their strategy development efforts. And we'll be revealing more on that work over the coming weeks as we come to the conclusion of the Faster project. Also, as you'll probably have seen, we've been making some announcements about charging locations across the regions, providing updates on install locations, and we'll have much more of that over the next few weeks as sites become operational. So I'm sure we'll hear much more about that this morning in terms of Scotland. And then again next month when we focus specifically on the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Also, another piece of work that we've been doing over the past few weeks is the final piece of research for the Faster project. And that's really looking at the changes in driver behaviour and attitudes to electric vehicles and sustainable transport systems across the regions over the past 2 years. So there is a survey which is open at the moment, and thank you to everyone who has already completed that. If anybody hasn't already had a chance to complete that survey, I will pop the link into the chat and you can do that at your leisure. It should only take you a few minutes, but all feedback and responses to that would be very much appreciated. At this point, I'm going to bring in my project colleagues from East Border Region, Sharon Digby and Pamela Arthurs. And East Border Region, as you may know, are the lead partner on the project. So they will give you a very quick update on some of the general work that they've been doing over the last few weeks and months. So if Sharon or Pamela is there.
Yes, thank you, Donal. Yes, we are the lead partner in the project. Our role has largely been to obviously lead the project in terms of ensuring it meets the requirements of INTERREG, of the fund. We've been liaising with project partners in relation to their claims and making sure that all the claims are submitted in accordance with the INTERREG rules and procedures. As Donal said, the project is across the 3 jurisdictions, and we're delighted now that the teams are all appointed in the 3 jurisdictions in relation to the installations of the chargers, and all work is well underway. In Scotland, we have 23 sites in Scotland. In Republic of Ireland, we've got 14 sites, and in Northern Ireland, 16 sites. So Northern Ireland is the last sort of start there. civil works is well underway on numerous sites within Northern Ireland, and the same with Republic of Ireland. So in Republic of Ireland, the appointed contractor there is Weave, and in Northern Ireland, it is EasyGo. So both teams are on the ground, both on track. It is a challenging timeline to get all installed, but as we know, the project ends on the 31st of December. Obviously all expenditure has to be claimed by that date. So working back then, we're looking at the end of November that all installations are to be completed. So we're on track, and looking forward to seeing all 73 chargers installed and operational.
And I suppose just to add to that, you know, the minimum capacity we're looking at was the 50 kV, but actually, you know, in some of them we will actually be installing 75 and 180. So, you know, that's just a recent development as well. But it's very much, you know, all shoulders to the wheel in terms of ensuring that the installations are complete by the deadline.
Thanks, Sharon
Excellent.
and Pamela, for the update. Euan, I suppose we'll hand back over to you now, and we'll get underway with, I suppose, the main focus for today, which is obviously looking at the project work in Scotland, and as you say, going back to the origins of the project and the work that's been happening over the last year or two.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donal, Sharon, and Pamela. And on that note, I'd like to bring in the other panelists who we have with us today. Mics on, cameras on. So we have Andrew Brown from Scottish Power. We have Jamie Dunsmore and Judy Moore from Transport Scotland. We have, well, obviously you've already met Pamela Arthurs and Sharon Digby from East Border Region. Ian Jessamine from Scottish Power, Scottish and Southern Energy Networks, I should say, SSEN. Ryan Sims from University of Strathclyde's PNDC. Power Networks Demonstration Centre, and Adam Wright from Everwarm. Have I missed anyone? I hope not, because it's a busy old panel that we've got with us today. We have Matthew Glennon as well, actually, who's joined the panelists. Hi, Matthew. Where are you at? I'm trying to see where you're hiding. Anyway, yeah, there's, as you can see, there's a lot of panelists.
Sorry, I think that might be a mistake. I was meant to join the panel, but
I was wondering as much. Yeah. You seem to have been
I think I've registered in as the wrong area, so apologies about that.
That's quite all right. Yeah. Awesome. That's a first. Yeah. Cheers, Matthew. So Donal, I think that means you've won a prize, because that's the one and only time that Donal sent a panelist invite to a regular attendee. Awesome. Well, very good to meet you as well, Matthew. Anyway, so let's go right back to the start on this. And having brought in all of the panelists that we have with us today, I suppose arguably we're heading back to Sharon and Pamela, because of the very origins of this project, I presume, would have stemmed from East Border Regions, being an INTERREG project and very much the kind of jurisdiction of the border regions. Who formed the project, and what was the thought process behind it? And also, obviously, border regions generally being between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, how did the rural west coast of Scotland end up being involved in the project as well? For which we're grateful, by the way. That's definitely not any criticism there. But how did Scotland become involved in the project too?
Well, I suppose in the first instance, as we all know, this is an INTERREG 5A funded project. And the eligible area for INTERREG 5A is all of Northern Ireland, border regions of Ireland, and the west coast of Scotland. So thereby, that's how the partnership developed in 3 areas. In terms of the actual formation of the project, SEUPB, the managing authority, had gone out and invited applications for this part of the INTERREG 5A programme, and they didn't actually receive any applications. They then approached ourselves in East Border Region, as we have a long track record working in INTERREG over many programmes, and in facilitating and enabling others to come together to develop genuine cross-border projects and to successfully implement them. So that is where we began the process. We were invited, and then from that, in the different areas, then we had the experts who could implement. So therefore the project developed in terms of Ulster University in Northern Ireland. We started with the Sustainable Energy Authority in Ireland as the partner there, the lead, and then HITRANS obviously in Scotland. So, and then our associate partners are our universities as well, and Strathclyde and Dundalk Institute, etc., all came on board as we were developing the project. So that's really where it stemmed from. It seems like a long time ago. And it's been a very steep learning curve in the 3 jurisdictions. I think the fact that this is a relatively new area, married with the fact that the project had to be implemented in accordance with the INTERREG rules and regulations. And, you know, that combination made it more challenging as well. And of course, the time frames from day one, we were under, you know, a very, very difficult time frame. And I suppose that you all know that the structural funds period is a 7-year period. There's a brick wall when you come to the end of that, and the brick wall for us now is December of 2023. So that's focused minds, and it's really made us all you know, ensure that whoever we're working with and whoever we're employing to install, you know, actually has a wherewithal to be able to do that for us. And we're confident, as Sharon says there, we're confident at this point in time, although a lot of things have to happen and fall into place, but we're confident that we will have the output met. But that's really where it came from in terms of our own involvement. So we had said on day one, we are not, as East Border region, experts in this field, but we have had that huge amount of experience in terms of large, strategic, genuine cross-border INTERREG projects.
So 2 key takeaways from that. One, I suppose when the going gets tough, the tough get going. The fact that the East Border region was invited to, you know, to make something of this opportunity, and very much has, it says a lot about your track record. So nice one on that. And the other thing as well is in terms of that hard stop of 31st of December, if all of the panelists appear to be very slowly turning towards Andrew Brown at this point from Scottish Power, and Adam from Everwarm, all eyes on you to make sure that everything's up and running by the end of the year. But we'll be coming back to you later in the session, of course. But yeah, so Pamela, you raise a good point about bringing in that additional expertise that East Border region didn't have, and I suppose that's a combination of local and technical expertise as well. So that's very much Gemma from HITRANS, and also from an academic perspective, Ryan from PNDC. I'd love for you both to kind of spell out the expertise that you've brought on board, starting with Gemma and then going to Ryan as well. And I think that that will lead quite neatly into the next kind of thing I was interested in, which is that site selection, which will inevitably also bring in Ian Jessamine from SSEN, because I'm sure that there are some key considerations to be made about exactly where you could stick these charges. It's not as simple as just plonking them, you know, where may seem to make most use to an EV driver. It might actually be grid constrained and so on. But coming back to it all, in terms of the knowledge that HITRANS was bringing in, Gemma.
Yeah, of course. So I work for the Highlands and Islands Transport Partnership. We're a regional transport partnership with a track record in delivering a lot of different aspects to do with transport, including infrastructure provision. So we came in as the procurement lead for this project. We brought in Cenex as consultants for the technical specification and some of the procurement kind of structure, and worked very closely with the Power Network Demonstration Centre team to look at site selection. And obviously appointed Scottish Power as the main contractor for the installs as well. So we're very much coordinating the delivery across Scotland.
Absolutely. Thanks for the spoiler alert about the winner of the tender. Of course, that's funnily enough one of the questions I had later on was the entire process behind it. But no, that's quite all right. I suppose we've kind of given it away with Andrew being on screen just now. But yeah, so Ryan, obviously Gemma mentions that you were in turn kind of brought in for your expertise on everything to do with power and grids and so on. So tell us more about your vital role in this project.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Sims from the PNDC. So we are a smart grid test and demonstration centre that's formerly part of the University of Strathclyde's electrical engineering department. So we've got a lot of expertise within our team of both energy systems modelling and planning, and then more recently transport systems modelling and planning. So we were involved quite early on in the project at the sort of outset of engaging with or supporting Gemma and the HITRANS team of engaging with the 3 Scottish local authorities to understand where the 24 Scottish charge points should be installed. So we approached that in a couple of different ways. Initially, there was quite close collaboration with the local authorities, trying to understand from a demand perspective where would EV drivers most want these charge points to be, and where would they be most valuable, and where would they get the most utilization. So we undertook that in a couple of different ways. We looked at it in a demand-led analysis, looking at where is there likely to be demand, both from resident populations and from people traveling through. So we looked at data sets that included both vehicle ownership and then mapping that to EV adoption statistics, and tried to make that more or use those sort of forecasting data to understand where there would be likely uptake, and then layered on top of that other elements that would inform where there is more transient traffic that would be likely to use that. So because we have some very rural areas, especially in Scotland, probably in all the regions of Faster, we have quite seasonal tourism where you've got peaks of demands in the summer, for example, that also would be expected to have demand from EVs in the future. So that was one element. The other side of the site location challenge that we looked at was looking at existing infrastructure and then trying to understand where the gaps were in that infrastructure, in terms of the journeys that you might want to travel through from one end of the region to another. So we used some GIS modelling to identify where there was gaps of more than, I believe it was 30 kilometres we ended up selecting as our gap that we wanted to fill, and then identified regions where there was no sort of public journey rapid chargers existing back in 2020 when we were doing that analysis. So we looked at it from those 2 different aspects, and then that gave us rough areas and regions that we thought would be most valuable to install the chargers. There was very close collaboration at that point with the local authorities. Something I'd reflect on there is that the 3 different local authorities and their in-house teams that we did work with, we had quite a different process or relationship with each of them. And that was predominantly due to the level of skills and expertise that they had within their own EV infrastructure teams, or even just infrastructure and roads teams, because they're really just in the process of setting up, having dedicated staff to understand about EV charging infrastructure. So some of them had a very clear idea of, we know exactly where we want these chargers to go already, if possible. And other local authorities, or one in particular, I think, needed a lot more closer collaboration, and we're very grateful for our sort of primary suggestions that were coming out of analysis. So that was the starting point of those regions, and then we layered those sort of general locations and started looking at the open data sets that are made available from the local distribution network company, which is Scottish and Southern Energy Networks, who Ian Jesseman is here representing. So SSEN, like a lot of DNOs, have started making a lot of their data available to people other than themselves, which means that you can look at the electricity network assets and see what capacity exists and where you might be most likely to get a connection quickly and at low cost. So we then started to look at the sort of high level regions and areas that we'd identified and worked with the local authorities, to find out where we thought capacity, what existed to get them installed in the sort of short timescales of the project and also within our total project budget. So we created more than 24 sites out of the end of that process. And we then worked closely with GEMA to start submitting connection applications. What we found from that process was it was definitely necessary to have contingency sites. And there's all sorts of reasons that we needed them. I won't get into the details of that right now, and maybe it will come out, but I think some of the data sets that we were using had errors, as all data sets do, and also the levels of sort of insights that we were able to gather from the open data in terms of how much capacity exists on the local network were not always exactly the same as what we got back from our connection quotes from the distribution network company. So it meant that certain sites we thought were going to be feasible just weren't, and therefore we had to look elsewhere for a site that would be viable within the project timescales. But there's a whole other host of reasons and challenges that meant some sites didn't go forward, and we sort of moved our way down our priority list that we generated with GEMA and the local authorities.
Wow, that is incredibly comprehensive. Thank you, Ryan. I would have expected no less from yourselves, of course, but I mean, the sheer volume of work that you've brought into the project is outstanding. And I think I could see Ian having the words pulled from his mouth when he started talking about the SSEN open data sets and so on, because that's really interesting to hear how the DNO, distribution network operator, was involved in the process too. But before we go on to Ian to kind of discuss a bit more from SSEN's perspective, it's worth pointing out, as Donald's mentioned in the chat, that there is the question and answer function. So Ryan did mention there were various different reasons for site selection that we probably don't have enough time to delve into all of them at the moment. But if you're particularly interested, then we do have the Q&A box if there's anything you want to ask any of us afterwards. Incidentally, you were also saying, Ryan, about liaising with the local authorities on this project. They all were invited, but unfortunately they were all terribly busy, so none of them have been able to make it along to today's webinar. Rachel Anderson from Highland Council is actually graduating today, so congratulations, Rachel. I hope you have a great day for it. But yeah, Ian, so obviously very important to actually be able to power these rapid chargers. So without kind of replicating too much of what Ryan has so comprehensively just described there, tell us more about SSEN's well, essential contribution to this project and your own personal involvement in it. You're on mute, by the way, just so you know.
I'm off mute now. Yes, I think initially I'd like to welcome all the work that Ryan and GEMA did. It's very unusual for customers to come to us with so much homework done to then select sites. What I would say about site selection is, because the network continues to evolve, we have connections coming on, connections going off, data that we provide rapidly goes out of date. So I think that's what we faced here with our design teams. They were looking at the data available to them on that day, and producing the quotes. It may have meant that there was a little bit of reinforcement required, which sort of made the decision that maybe that site wasn't suitable, or there was some reason why maybe a delay would cause the work to go beyond the date of the project. So pleased to see that they had contingency sites in mind, so that we could actually get them the quotes that they needed. But as I say, what we always ask customers to do is maybe engage with us at a very early stage. That was done. We were pleased that that was done. We were able to work with the team in order to get the quotes to them. I believe there's probably still some issues that probably need to be resolved going forward. However, I think that the process of early engagement, the process of evaluating the sites at an early stage, looking at site selection, using all the data that's available, it sort of helps our design teams get it right first time. So I think that's been very good throughout the project. when it comes to delivery of projects, there are issues with getting consents to lay cables. That can often take an inordinate amount of time to come across third-party land. You need the cooperation of landowners to do that. So often when we are connecting customers, we often have to go through this consents process, which can delay connections. Other issues that we can encounter is if there are assets that have to be ordered, long lead assets, and these long lead times are getting longer and longer because a lot of the manufacturers are working at full pelt at the moment, and we are finding that some of our dates that we're getting from manufacturers are stretching. So where we might promise a customer a connection date, that is very dependent on getting the assets delivered and getting our teams in place to actually do the works. So yes, everybody at the moment wants EV chargers. Everybody at the moment are looking to connect low carbon, and our teams are working very hard to try and satisfy all the customers. So as I say, what was unique about this project was the amount of homework that was done prior to the customers coming to us, and we would certainly welcome that if there are projects like this in the future. We're more than happy to do initial assessments of sites so that selection process can be refined very early on. So again, would welcome that for anyone who's looking to maybe look at projects that have multiple sites in mind. And we've been doing that with local authorities individually and obviously through the FASTER project as well.
Some really useful advice in there. Thank you, Ian. If I can be really annoying and ask for a tiny bit of homework from you in terms of any kind of useful resources for anyone looking to install charging infrastructure or renewables or battery storage or anything else that requires a connection to your part of the grid. If there's any useful links that you can stick in the chat, please do, because I think there are some charge point operators and renewables installers who are with us in the audience today and inevitably will be watching on YouTube as well once this is uploaded.
Yes.
So any resources would be absolutely awesome. But yeah, great to hear just how comprehensive the preparation work was on this project. I see that we have a hand raised in the audience, and David, who actually, having said that none of the local authorities within Scotland could make it today, or at least the ones involved in the FASTER project, if I remember correctly, Anne is from Highland Council. Hand has been lowered, but if you want to type a wee message in the chat, Anne, or in the Q&A, we can definitely try and bring you in. But thank you for coming along. So yeah, the other kind of thing to progress here, obviously saying about how at least some of the FASTER project local authorities sadly weren't able to attend. The national authority, Transport Scotland, we're lucky enough to have two of you. So we've got Jamie and Judy. It would be great to hear FASTER project's involvement with Transport Scotland and vice versa, and how actively involved Scotland's transport body was in the shaping of this project and in the support of this project. Please do tell us more. I'll let you have a fight over who wants to go first.
Thanks. I can chip in. So I'm Jamie Dunsmore. Myself and Judy both work with Transport Scotland. We're the National Transport Agency for Scotland, and we work in the Low Carbon Economy Directorate of the organisation. So my team leads on, amongst a few other things, the work on installing and supporting local authorities and others to install public EV charging infrastructure. It was really good to be able to get involved from the early stages and the early sort of concept around some of the work that's been done by the FASTER project. I think one of the challenges we, and I'm sure others in different parts of the regions have, is around how we support rural areas in particular, where there's maybe less of a demand for charging. And I think for Scotland, a lot of the reason this was so attractive for us to support was just because it's looking at some of the more challenging parts of the country to install rapid charging in particular, which is really important given the distances and the reliance people have on cars and transport around rural areas as opposed to other parts of the country. And I think As a bit of background, we've been working with local authorities across Scotland for over a decade through a number of different funding schemes to try and develop and install public charging infrastructure. We've developed the Charge Place Scotland network that's grown over the years to be one of the bigger networks, certainly in Scotland, but one of the bigger networks across the UK. We've done that a lot just by working directly with local authorities, but we're now using all the experience that we've gained to try and develop that approach, looking to work more directly with local authorities and with the private sector just to sort of continue growing and developing. And it's really good seeing the likes of Scottish Power and others involved in the project as well, because I think it's bringing the expertise of not just one organisation or one group together, and it's bringing, you know, like Ryan and the team and the team at HITRANS as well, in gets a really good range of views and experience so that we can see, I suppose, what's possible across some of this. And I think what I would say about our involvement is it's been an excellent project and referred to quite a bit in some of the, you know, the work that we do, or the sort of the way that we promote our support for rural areas. I don't think Transport Scotland, we match fund the project, but the real credit for all the work that's going on goes to the guys that are involved, you know, HITRANS and Ryan and others that have been actually doing the work and putting all the effort in on the ground. I think the thing that we get the most out of is some of the experience and the lessons learned. And like Ian said, you know, the work that's done, the homework that's done on the project, and the work that was done looking at the different sites, and the way that that was approached, looking at how, you know, how charging infrastructure, the existing charging infrastructure network works for those areas, and trying to spot where the parts of the region are that need additional charging. It's excellent, because it just helps us sort of reinforce the message that we need a charging network that works for all people in Scotland, and it's not just, you know, the main trunk roads have got good provision, but as soon as you go off those, maybe less so. So I think a lot from our side is really looking at the lessons that can be learned. And there's a few other things, I won't steal anyone's thunder from the discussions that go on later, but there's a few other things that are incredibly helpful just to get people to have a bit more of a focused think about on what's important, particularly in the more rural parts of the country, because I think the solutions that we need across Scotland are varied depending on the type of charging infrastructure you're trying to put in and who you're trying to cater for. But I think the biggest challenge in rural parts of Scotland in particular, like the West Coast, is that what you're installing probably has to cater for a much wider range of users than it would do if it was in a city. So I think, yeah, just it's been really good to see how things have developed, and genuinely hats off to the guys in the team for being able to pull something like this together. It's good to see that many charge points getting installed across the west of Scotland.
You allude to some very good points there, Jamie, not least the fact that the kind of commercialization of the EV charging network in the central belt is really taking off now. We're seeing loads of different players coming in, but it is the very rural, very remote locations that still require that support. So it's great to see that Transport Scotland recognises that and is continuing to support those communities where possible. And it's not just the communities they're supporting, it's the tourists and the visitors and the passers-by who will still need to be able to charge to get to where they need to be. So yeah, very good to see that that's been recognised, rather than assuming that, you know, from a Glasgow or Edinburgh based office that Scotland is a one-size-fits-all setup. So yeah, very, very astute observation from Transport Scotland. Judy, anything you'd like to add to that before we head on and have a look at the tender process?
No, thanks, Euan. I think Jamie's covered most of it. Jamie was in at the very beginning of the project, and I've sort of taken it over as we've sort of worked towards the end. But so most of the hard work was already done.
Fair play, fair play. Passed on the baton then. Well, it's great to have both the original and new representation from Transport Scotland. And no doubt there'll be some interesting questions for you at the end. But yeah, I'm aware, as usual, the conversation has been so comprehensive that having a look at what we have on the agenda versus the time we have left, we'll need to get motoring on. So in as concise a manner as possible, I'd love to have a look at the tender itself. So first of all, what types of charger were required? What was the specification? Who chose that specification and why? Presumably, would that be East Border region that led that, or was it more of a team effort? Who wants to tell us more about the reasons for the specification of charger chosen?
we had no say in it at all, Euan. This was what the fund said, you know, so there's being a minimum of 50. As I said earlier, we're in the happy position of actually, you know, exceeding that. But, you know, when this was developed, it was a minimum of 50 being the rapid charger. So that was it. We couldn't move from that.
Fair play. And actually another kind of key point that continues to get raised, and I've just realised, I don't know if closed captions have been enabled for this webinar, but if someone could do so, please, that would be very good. Whilst I go on to the next key point, accessibility. Something that the likes of a friend of the FASTA project, Kate Tyrrell, and the Charge Safe project is very keen to promote, is making sure that if you have limited mobility, that you can easily access as much public charging infrastructure as possible, so you don't get left behind by the transition towards EVs. And Gemma, I know that you worked very hard on the accessibility aspects. First and foremost, was accessibility required by the funding? And if not, presumably it was all your own doing, but what guidelines did you follow in trying to make these as accessible as possible?
We actually held a survey across the partners to try and understand the priorities we wanted to get out of the procurement process, and one of those was accessibility for everyone. As Jamie said, it's about making sure that it can reach as many people as possible and not just the kind of majority or the mainstream. So we looked into accessibility on the back of that, and it was quite a new topic at that point. This was sort of 2021, it's a couple of years ago, and it's still an evolving process. Obviously the PAS guidance has come out now, and it's something we can hold up and work towards, and that will take a bit of time, because it also means the chargers themselves have to change in design, etc. But we have done what we can on the FASTA project to improve accessibility. So a lot of the bays have accessibility strips either on one side or both sides or behind them as well, to improve that mobility access. And another important point to mention on the spec of the chargers is that it was a requirement of funding that the chargers needed to be interoperable across the 3 regions. And in Scotland, we've always had the RFID card for access on the Charge Place Scotland network. But we wanted to ensure that drivers going to Ireland or Northern Ireland would have a similar experience as they would in Scotland. And again, since the project was conceived, things have moved on really quickly, and contactless payment is much more common now as well. So all the chargers in Scotland have contactless payment to allow that interoperable driver experience.
Very important, that, and I'm glad that was picked up on early on in the project. So with actually that's a good point about the kind of interoperability between all of the 3 regions. That said, the way that the FASTA project has panned out in Scotland has been unique in comparison to Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, because instead of having a commercial network operating it, I believe that the tender involved not just the cost of grid connections and so on, but supply of hardware, which, am I right in saying, would then be owned by the local authorities and put on the Charge Place Scotland network. I'm intrigued to find out why that methodology was chosen for Scotland in comparison, because it's so different to Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland in the way that those parts of the FASTA project have been developed. Who can tell me more about that key differential and the reason for it?
I'm happy to take that one, Euan. So. Cheers. Again, the project was conceived back in 2018, and at that point, the charging network across Scotland was largely owned and operated by the councils, and they were put on the Charge Place Scotland back office, or as a network operator that was publicly funded. And as Transport Scotland were our match funders as well, it made sense to try and fit the faster chargers into that landscape that currently existed. The landscape has changed a lot over the course of the project, and as we know, it's moving to a more commercial basis now. So although it was a condition of funding that they went on the Charge Place Scotland network, there is provision within the sort of legal frameworks that those charges can be transferred in the future if and when the Charge Place Scotland network ceases to operate. I think there was one other point I was going to make on that, but
no, nonetheless, that's useful to know. I mean, I suppose it's key to remember, as you mentioned, that the project was conceived 5 years ago, and it just shows how quickly things have developed since then. With the the increasing amount of interest in Scotland, even more rural areas, from commercial operators. I've certainly seen the likes of, I mean, there are many networks going in, not least Andrew and to an extent Ian's kind of sister arm of the SSEN business, I suppose, their own respective networks that are going in. But I've seen some pretty sizable charging hubs in surprisingly rural locations in Scotland now. It's getting quite exciting. But yeah, anyway, I suppose moving on, or before we move on, coming back to a point that Jamie had made about the need to cater for a greater variety of vehicles with a limited amount of hardware in rural areas to make it economically viable. I think something that is an important lesson for the Faster project, and something that we perhaps hadn't perceived happening back then, is that we are starting to see quite a lot of heavy duty vehicles electrifying. Everything from bin lorries to intercity electric buses are used in Scotland that are fully electric, some of which have high voltage battery packs, as in above the 500 volts that the typical 50 kilowatt rapid chargers that are being installed by the Faster project can give out on the CCS cable. For electric cars that have, say, an 800 volt battery pack, they typically have a means to be able to boost the charger voltage to that of the battery pack, so they can still use a legacy 50 kilowatt rapid charger as opposed to a high power, high voltage charger. But for the likes of these bin lorries and buses and so on, quite often they don't have the ability to boost the voltage of the charger. So, for example, when I was in the Outer Hebrides, if I'd done that in an electric tour coach, there would have been literally nowhere I would have been able to charge that coach. Even although they had the right socket, they didn't have the right power supply. And on a similar note to that, the Faster project's own roadshow in Fort William, we had an amazing electric intercity bus from Ember, which is one that's regularly used from Glasgow to Dundee and back on one charge. But despite the fact that the venue was right across the road from Fort William's charging hub, which has the exact same kind of chargers that are being installed by the Faster project, the Ember bus couldn't charge on those, despite the fact it was CCS, because the voltage of the charger was too low. So they had to bring a portable charger and a 50-meter extension lead. So looking forward, I think we now we're aware of that. We wouldn't have been aware of that in 2018. But in terms of catering for more people with the same amount of hardware, that is an invaluable lesson. It's not just the power of the charger that's going to be important, it's the voltage of the CCS cable to cater for these niche vehicles, the likes of electric intercity tour buses that we should start seeing coming to Scotland in increasing numbers in the not too distant future. So yeah, just a technical observation that I've noticed during the Faster project. But the very good news was, of course, that the tender process went out and it was won by Andrew Brown at Scottish Power. So I'm sure you must be chuffed to bits with that, but tell us more about your proposal for that tender, the hardware that's been provided. I've kind of alluded to, admittedly, but yeah, tell us more about what made you win and the timeline so far to roll this out.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today. First of all, just to give you a background, I'm part of the Smart Mobility team here at Scottish Power, where we deliver residential, business and a public network as well, which we're developing at the moment. In terms of this tender, I think it was good for us because we recognised that it certainly fitted the bill in terms of what we're already doing. We have long-term contractual relationships with a number of different hardware providers, as well as installers as well, and commissioners. Sorry, commission agents, if you like. And this one, in terms of it being 50 kilowatt chargers with CCS and the Chademo, there was a normal fit, a natural fit for us to install Raption 50s, which was a Circuitor product. It's something we are very experienced in installing. It's common across that Charge Place Scotland network. And certainly our contracts enabled us to access the hardware for that. And our installers and commissioning agents are very familiar with that as well. Something we do install at the moment. So in terms of dealing with that tender, yes, that was very straightforward in itself. The more complexity was obviously the kind of geographical nature and installation of where these are proposed for and are indeed obviously being installed at the moment.
And of course, the people who are installing this with Scottish Power, the kind of boots on the ground, I believe are ever warm. We have Adam Wright with us today, one of the key people who's been rolling these out. So what challenges have you come up against, Adam, so far in the installation of these chargers? Obviously, Andrew's alluded to the very kind of rural, rugged nature of this, but what have been the hurdles, and also were they hurdles that you'd expected, and if not, how did you manage to overcome them?
Thank you. Yes, as Andrew said, the geographical location was incredibly challenging with ferries, especially with the time of year we done it, which was a lovely time of the year to be working in the West Coast during the summer, but we also had the tourism season to battle with. So we had issues with accommodation and travel being two big planning points we had to do to get personnel on and off site, and just the general busyness of these locations, making sure the areas were kept safe from tourists and public and stuff as well during the project. So it was all key priorities we had to take on board while doing the projects, and especially when we got on to likes of Uist and Stornoway, availability of materials that normally you could drive for 10 minutes if you were working in the Central Belt and pick up, became a 4.5 hour round trip, depending on even if the boat sailed. So it had its challenges when you were out on the islands, but as I say, worked very closely with locals, made sure we used local where we could as well, local suppliers, and obviously accommodation up there as well. So that helped us, integrate with the community, which then actually helped us with feedback when we're doing jobs. It's amazing how many people would pop along and say, oh, did you know that this was here, or that could be under the road? And sometimes maps don't have everything. We buy civils maps, so the local engagement, local knowledge helped us as well. So which prevented some of these what could be bigger challenges becoming present. So the local interaction helped us a lot as well. So that kind of really covered off the site area.
That's great. So it wasn't a case of kind of isolating yourself and just kind of doing your own thing within that area. You were reaching out and making the most of that kind of network and building that network around you. I guess that's crucial. Although you raise a good point about the ferries, not just obviously competing with tourist traffic, but competing with whether they were actually running or not. And that presumably wasn't just due to weather. It would have been reliability, I guess, as is rather high profile at the moment, at which point all of our panelists in their little boxes turn to the Transport Scotland team. It's like, ferries caused disruption. But no, it's a sore point for anyone in Scotland at the moment, I guess. But yeah, another key thing is you obviously built out that communication, not just with with like local suppliers and local accommodation and so on, but it's key to give communication to EV drivers as to what's going on, and not just EV drivers who are local, but EV drivers who are planning on going to these places. So I'd be interested to hear from basically any of the panel who would have been in charge of communication, and I suppose that's everyone from yourself, Adam, contractors, through to Andrew, Scottish Power, through to feeding back to the consortium. How did the project keep EV drivers abreast of where these chargers were going in, when they were going in, and if any existing units were going to be affected in the meantime, if they were going to be installed near them and perhaps kind of take out the power supply in, for a temporary amount of time? How was all of this fed to EV drivers? Who wants to take that one? it's a bit ominous because I do have a kind of picture round for this one as well, which is
I'm happy to come in there, Euan.
Yeah, sure.
So we're working very closely with the council contacts still, and when Adam and Andrew get across the sort of health and safety documents to us, we share those with the council, who then make the information available publicly on their website to alert the communities. And obviously there are some private sites involved as well, and we keep them up to date with the plans and progress for each of the charges. So from our point of view, yeah, it's via the council or directly with private landowners.
Good to know. And certainly on the council perspective, I'm just going to very quickly share some feedback from Portree. Let me just quickly get that slide up. So here we go. These are a couple of the new Faster Project chargers that are going in next to the absolutely vital lifeline of a rapid charger in Portree in Skye. Don't get me wrong, since I was last there in 2019, Skye does have a lot more rapid chargers now, but recently there's been a string of them from kind of Broadford onwards that have all encountered issues at the same time, because they're all very old. These, the same as this one on the left, you know, they're getting on a bit. However, I'm led to believe that this unit on the left was functional. Then these two new rapids from the Faster project were started to be installed, and clearly there'd be something to do with the power supply that they share, and they were all kind of coned off. And as you can see on Zap Map here, some people weren't best pleased by it, but they were clearly wondering what was going on. So presumably Highland Council would have been informed of everything that was going on there. And also, hopefully, Charge Place Scotland. But Charge Place Scotland here says that the status of the original charger on the left-hand side there is unknown, rather than definitely working or definitely not working, or in this case, completely coned off and powered down. Now, it's a shame that Charge Place Scotland aren't here. They were invited, but they do have a nasty habit of saying that things are unknown when they are definitely known to be offline. So I'm definitely not having a dig at the Faster project stakeholders on that one. But in terms of that kind of communication, presumably it would have been Highland Council that would have been aware of this and had to communicate this to Charge Place Scotland and then to EV drivers as to what was going on with these chargers, when they would be commissioned, and also the fate of the old one, which had been powered down, presumably as an interim measure.
I think it's very much the public that have come to the council about the status of the old one, and that was actually completely independent. It became faulty before we installed, so it was nothing to do with the Faster build. It's just coincidental that it's been at the same time. So we are working to get that commissioned as soon as possible, because there's no provision currently live just now.
That's good to know, actually. The way that I'd heard the kind of stories from local drivers was that it implied that it was as if the installation of the new ones had resulted in its power supply being shut down, obviously whilst things were being wired up. But yeah, I didn't realise that it actually knackered itself independently. And of course, the one just along the road in Broadford, totally separate to any Faster project sites, that one had knackered itself too. So things were a bit skittish on Skye for a while. But obviously, once those new chargers are commissioned, that will improve things substantially, which I suppose means that we can bring in Adam as the boots on the ground, specifically for the Portree site, but also for all of the other Faster project sites. There was a really good question in the chat there asking, apparently it's been answered live, asking when those sites will be operational. Is there any kind of word on when they'd be expected to be commissioned? Have you got any more info on that, Adam, at the moment?
I don't want to sloppy shoulder this one, but I'll probably have to pass it over to Andrew or Gemma to answer that one, if I'm honest. Physically on the ground and doing the installations, we are hopefully aiming to be finished within the next three to 4 weeks. But there is also the commissioning process, and we will have to do line markings to make sure all the bays are marked out and everything is safe for everybody to then use them. And subject to whether putting line markings down can be challenging as well. But I think Andrew or Gemma will give you more in depth on potential dates.
That's totally fair. Yeah, go for it. Andrew, Gemma, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, certainly I'll take that. I think with the project is has had a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving things to be considered, a lot of dates to be adhered to. One of these things obviously is dealing with DNO, is dealing with metering, dealing with obviously contractors, the 3 different councils, and obviously the agent themselves. And I think the things is we can install as quickly as we like and can within these geographical boundaries, but we are also then to get that live and available to the public. It's very much down to the availability of that DNO to be able to give us that supply in time to be able to get that metering in place. At which point, only at that point can we then commission and make live a charger. And I think one of these things is in the past, maybe we've been able to, we've had access to all of it, or it's been part of a whole project where we've managed all parts of these. And it's in fact, it's been quite good, I guess, that we've we're a third party to that process in terms of DNO selection and paid for, etc., quotations, and scheduling, and also the metering. But it does mean that we are perhaps at the mercy of and EDF in this case, in terms of some of the metering, which is perhaps a little bit delayed. And some of that's geographical because of the country, in terms of you don't send a guy out to do one site, for instance, you wait until you get 4 or 5 to go and visit the islands and get that in place. So that really is the ultimate, decider in when things happen. But we would hope we would have majority of these commissioned within, certainly I would hope within the next 5 or 6 weeks, certainly in terms of civils and installations, as Adam was saying there, these will be completed within the next 3 or 4 weeks. Other things that I'm sure Gemma will smile at is arranging, leases and permissions, etc., permits, all that kind of stuff, which sometimes, and inevitably things sometimes get in the way or take longer to process through councils, etc. And we understand that, but at the same time, we won't touch a site until everything's signed off. So it is important that everything is as much as we can, obviously in place is in advance of as much as we can, because it's really that DNO date that's driving things, if you like. Once you've got all the permissions, we get a DNO. We're working back from that effectively to say that we want to make it be as efficient as possible, trying to get around the islands, etc. And that's where, as Adam will testament to, that to go and the same thing, to go and do one site across in a ferry and then go back another week and then go back another week, that really isn't the way to do things. So the complexity of everything really means that it maybe takes longer than something would just be delivered as a hub in the Central Belt, for instance, half an hour from every depot that you can imagine. So in that respect, I think the timelines of the project themselves, I think, is achievable. And I think it's just that final commissioning piece that really is that kind of final icing, but it is absolutely essential to the delivery.
Yeah, you raise a good point. So as we've already seen, there are many of the faster project chargers already in the ground. Adam and his team have done the job, just need to give them a lick of paint for the bay markings, which incidentally is also very important to stop people from icing the bays, of course, blocking them with an internal combustion engine vehicle. But it's very much a case of getting them hooked up to the power supply now. Before we bring in Ian to kind of discuss, obviously, SSEN's important role in delivering that power from the distribution network, Andrew, you'd mentioned another company there, EDF, to do with the metering. So why are they involved in the metering? And, are they arguably more of a bottleneck at this point than the actual supply from the distribution network to the chargers? I suppose, Ian, you can come in on that one as well. But yeah, tell us more about why EDF is involved in particular.
I think Gemma's probably best placed to comment on that. We don't get involved in requesting that metering operator or provider on site and scheduling of that. But yeah, it does seem to be a bit of a bottleneck, and accessing the right people, I think, within some of the meter operators is some of the issues as well, and maybe just their availability to go and install meters. We've seen a difference between some of the ones that were installed on the mainland compared to maybe some of the issues that we're having in some of the islands, and I think it's just a different team, if you like. But we're getting around that. Gemma?
Yeah, just to come back to why they're involved, from a my very layman's perspective is that SSE are putting in the new electrical connection, but EDF are the end supplier, so they are measuring the amount of electricity that's used through the meter, and getting payment for that electricity from the councils. We have to arrange that metering through the council so they can request when that happens. But ultimately, what's been difficult is that we have no sway in when that happens. We can't kind of hold them to a timeline, or, as Andrew said, necessarily speak to the right people to sort of explain our situation. So it is quite a bottleneck, and particularly in some areas more than others, the more remote places. We're getting on quite well in the Argyll and Bute area. I think it's working. We're a little bit further behind the schedule in the Highlands, but it seems to be progressing in the Highlands as well. But we are struggling a bit. We've been waiting since I think since September for the metering to be done in the Western Isles. So that is a hold up for us at the moment.
So, I mean, if EDF doesn't want the business, is there a way that Highland Council, presumably if it's EDF that's providing their electricity, could switch supplier to someone who actually values the people? Actually, no, it wouldn't be Highland Council, it would be Western Isles. Can they not switch to someone who actually values, their custom? Because that is poor from EDF. I will say that straight down the lens at EDF, get a move on.
The councils bulk procure their electricity supply, so they're signed into EDF, and I don't know the ins and outs of that agreement, but they can't simply swap.
Okay, well, I'd love to find out who's involved at EDF and go full bore Malcolm Tucker from the thick of it down the phone at them, because they need to be getting a move on, and that is holding up the FASTER project, especially with that deadline of 31st of December hurtling towards us. That is a genuine concern. So they're probably coming up from some office in Luton or somewhere, aren't they? And they're just like, oh, don't make me do stuff. It's probably a bit of a drive to get to Fort William, let alone, heading on a ferry, how novel, across to the Isles. So yeah, seriously, they need to pull their finger out. Actually, Gemma, your colleague Matthew, who joined us very briefly on the panel, had literally just mentioned the metering consideration in the Q&A there. And also alluded to the times and difficulties associated with legalities of leases and licenses. Sometimes these have meant that sites have been cancelled as they cannot be overcome in a worst case scenario. Best case, though, is it all went smoothly. So yeah, what kind of issues were encountered with the leases in particular? Because I think this is very important, not just for anyone else looking to install charging infrastructure, although chances are they'll be aware of that from their own experience, but for EV drivers to understand why this perfectly good site just never materialized. What was the reasons that were encountered?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that when we sort of discussed sites at the beginning of the project, one of the options that came up is whether we installed on any private land rather than council-owned land, and the decision was made that we would, because there isn't always council land available where you want to put a EV charger. But this was quite a novel approach, and it's the leases and legal structure behind that hadn't been done before, so we were piloting that. And it's a process that's, I think, been a lot. It's been a lot more work to bring those leases and licenses kind of into place. We have come up with some or against some kind of issues with that. So, for example, if it's a private landowner and they've got a security on their land, so say they've got a hotel and they've got a bank loan on it, the bank have to also approve the lease, so the council leasing that land out from them. So that's a process that can take a long time. Or that the bank might not be happy with for their own internal reasons. So that's something we came across. We've come across other ones where the landowner might be happy with the lease, But again, we've not been able to secure the way leaves outside of that lease. So although the landowner's quite happy, we still can't cross the land with the trenching and the cables to be able to get to their land. So it's just quite a complex issue that we've learned an awful lot from, and would certainly change next time, not in terms of whether we'd install on private land, but just there's been a lot learnt in how we'd go about it next time.
Euan Doyle from Scottish Borders Council has asked a perfect question, which funnily enough does allude to the exact same thing I was about to ask you just now. So from lessons learned from this project, what legislative improvements could be delivered to help overcome some of the bottlenecks to delivery, not least the way leaves that were just mentioned there? For example, can the new Roads and Streetworks Act, Roads Scotland Act and Transport Scotland Act be updated to reflect our changing national infrastructure development and to provide mechanisms to support quicker delivery? And I will tack on to the end of that the news that National Grid is working very closely with government to try and overcome transmission network bolstering delays, and the proposals that have been developed, again, to do with way leaves for vast swathes of land, loads and hundreds or thousands of different landowners, taking that down from 14 years to build a project down to 7. So imagine the truncation of the amount of time that would be required if similar proposals or reforms were made to get 1 or 2 way leaves for the likes of a faster project charger. But what legislative changes would you recommend, or would anyone in this project recommend, to improve access to be able to actually run these cables in the future? No one wants to take it. Oh, well. So, yeah, at least we're aware of the issue, and it's a case of trying to resolve it. But I would say that the National Grid reforms that were proposed, or planning permission reforms that have been proposed recently, should go a long way to increasing the build out of the transmission network, and applied properly, that could also work for the distribution network and for local supply to charging infrastructure, renewables, energy storage, homes, offices, etc. So keep a very close eye on that.
So I could maybe just add one. Sorry, I don't know how to raise a hand as a panelist.
Oh, right. Oh, there's a reaction button you can use that. But yeah, please, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think on the distribution connections and actually laying the cables and who pays for what and how that is done, there actually has been quite a lot of changes on distribution connection regulations as the faster project has progressed, and that has had an impact on some of our sites. So for example, in April earlier this year in 2023, there was quite significant changes to how connection costs are apportioned to charge point sites and to the connector. So basically the division of costs that are spread across all of our energy bills is now a lot higher, and the selection of costs that are appointed to the connecting customer are now smaller. So that has had, in my opinion, a huge change on how a project like the faster project would have got connected and how much they'd be responsible for. And that's also part of a much larger range of changes happening within energy networks in general, and how people like SSEN are going to be able to upgrade their network ahead of need. And that it's all tied into these same changes where SSEN should, with good forecasting data, or what they go through a process called the distribution future energy scenarios that forecasts the uptake and deployment of low carbon technologies like EV chargers, and then are able to use that as justification for upgrading the network in these areas before someone like Highland Council or Western Isles comes along and asks for it. So that should hopefully speed up all that. I don't have the same level of expertise on like the planning consents and way leaves, but it does seem like that needs to go hand in hand so that process is streamlined as well.
Well, funnily enough, Anne David has mentioned in the chat that site selection always will also consider legal and land ownership issues. Most are not insurmountable, but they do take time. So we have a couple of hands raised. Andrew, we'll come back to you in a second because Gemma had her hand up first. Please do fire away.
Thanks. I just wanted to come in after Ryan and say that those changes in cost to the sort of D&O quotes, I think will really help with planning as well, because the budget quotes should be more accurate because they never included upgrades upstream. It makes it easier to plan for projects like this as well. And although I don't know how this kind of feeds into policy, but I think kind of talking about these projects afterwards and the lessons that we've learned from them is really helpful. And for me, the biggest thing I'd like to see change is being able to ask kind of all the contractors involved, so SSE and EDF, for example, being able to have them either commit to the project deadline or be able to at least acknowledge it, because at the moment it's very hard to coordinate those different parties when there's no sort of commitment to the same time frame. So that's something, I don't know how that would come into policy, but that's something I would like to see. Thank you, Gemma. And Andrew?
Yes, I echo the same thing Gemma's talking about. In another project we worked on, we had things blocked originally by the costs of reinforcements, and then as Ryan's said that was kind of lifted in April, and we moved along with other sites. So that's really has been really good, but liberating. I think in terms of the and Gemma will allude to this as well, in terms of like the process of getting a quote, getting it accepted, getting the process moving through, and some of that detailed evaluation doesn't get done until you do accept quotes, etc. And then you're getting into the times of actually scheduling a date, etc. If you miss that project, that process, then it becomes that you're back into the cycle again of having a re-quote, and then the timescales, etc. And I understand there's a charter there, there's SLAs involved, and we all sort of adhere to that. In terms of legislative changes, it'd be good if and we are serious about expanding the networks, that we have certain natures where it's EV work, where that is either accelerated or there's a different timeline, etc., or a different attitude taken, not attitude, but a different approach taken to it. That said, I think from my point of view, in terms of this project, I think SSE, I've seen some good flexibility, I think, in terms of giving us alternative dates where we either want to accelerate things or want to push things back a bit, which projects always will. I think that's been great. And I think even when we did have to go back and get something refreshed, I think it was within reason. And I don't know whether it's certainly not something I've experienced with other DNOs. It's been very rigid. It's been very not combative, but it's certainly been very rigid and inflexible. So I think that's been one good point that I've certainly seen from SSE.
Thank you, Andrew. And Ryan.
Yeah, I'll make this one really quick. Just in terms of those suggested changes to process or legislation, one thing that I have found and spoke with Gemma a couple of times, and I think did feed this to the councils as well, is that a lot of these charge points fall under planning rules, which are called permitted developments, if they're able to comply with certain restrictions, such as being under 2.2 meters in height and being far enough away from a road. That is all really positive and helps. That's already sort of streamlined the process of installing them somewhat. I think something that does create, however, as we've highlighted, and all these different steps and how long it does take from project conception to getting something in the ground, is that as we open up, especially in Scotland, the market to more competition and have more operators and developers deploying infrastructure, it does mean that there's not a huge amount of centralised coordinated planning that we might have right now with the local authority or Transport Scotland-led infrastructure. And I think there could be some argument that there might be, I'm not saying we should get rid of the permitted development rules and make it harder, but maybe have a requirement for people to post or publish somewhere what their planned intentions are prior to going ahead with a site, because that would allow different operators to consider what their competition will be, and as they're building a business model and business case for installing infrastructure, how much use it's going to get they might then decide there's another site that would be better for their business model, whether that's a local authority for their own revenue or a profit-making company. So I think sharing the infrastructure that's going in ahead of it being commissioned, and then telling the public it's available today, you didn't know anything about it, I think that could be something positive.
Very good point, actually. And Ian, I want to bring you in. One, obviously, SSE got a bit of a mention in some of those comments there, but also with regards to, as I mentioned before, the connection of these chargers to the grid. It seems as if EDF is the bottleneck, but tell us about SSEN's progress with regards to all of the sites in the rural west of Scotland so far, and if everything's on track there from your end.
I'm not sorry, I'm not close to the delivery of individual sites, but pleased to hear that Andrew's quite happy with how flexible we've been in terms of rearranging dates where possible. Just so we can get the boundaries sorted out, we will lay a cable up to what we call the cutout. The meter is beyond that. EDF, yes, obviously they've had issues with getting meters installed, but we would not be able to fully energize the site until the meter is installed. So effectively, that can be a blockage. We as a DNO will not do metering. We're not allowed to. Regulator says our boundary is the cutout, and it opened up the market to meter operators and installers to allow them to do that. I am aware that not necessarily EDF, but there are a number of suppliers who will not fit meters in the Western Isles. So we have issues often getting connections where the meter operator will not even turn up to the islands to fit a meter. Hence why customers then have to go to other suppliers in order to get those meters installed. There's nothing preventing someone getting a meter installed by one supplier and then subsequently changing their supplier. I mean, that is open to everyone, even the general public, to change their supplier as and when they wish to. I appreciate that councils have a sort of providers across their estate. And when their estate does go to the islands, often that can be difficult in order to get connections. And I agree with Andrew that often the likes of EDF will not turn up for a single meter. They'll wait until 3, 4, 5 have to be installed, and then they'll send someone up in order to get those supplies done. Looking at the consents issue, we will not be allowed to enter third-party land until the consents are in place. We can't start digging up someone's land, for instance, to lay a cable unless we've got his consent to do that. So that can be the delaying part as well, not necessarily just the metering. And it was interesting that was part of the discussion today about how licensing and leases and way leaves have been an issue for certain sites. Changes to legislation, I understand that telecoms have a more flexible approach because telecoms infrastructure seems to be strategic. I think EV infrastructure should possibly be seen in the same vein, that it's strategic infrastructure for the public. So when a telecom company wishes to erect a tower, I think there is almost a deemed, that they will get an electricity connection to that tower. So I think the landowners have less of a say in the cable, maybe where it actually goes, but the fact that they can't block connection. I think the telecom towers have access to courts to allow that to be done. And as I say, because it's seen as strategic infrastructure for the telecom network, I think they have better access to the courts than, let's say, we have. I mean, we have a necessary way leave process, but that's long-winded and doesn't guarantee that we will get the outcome we're looking for, because there's always an alternative route. And the courts often feel that if you explored all the options before you come to us. So way leaves can be a delaying factor. And as I say, metering seems to have been an issue for the FASTER project here, but it's maybe just because of the remoteness of it. As Andrew mentioned, if you're doing it in the central belt, metering will not necessarily be an issue there.
Thank you, Ian. We've got a couple of questions and comments on this topic. It's definitely catching the attention of the audience. So Mark Constable mentions 2020 hindsight, putting metering as a supplier hub responsibility rather than assigning it to the DNO when everything was kind of revised in the 1990s has turned out to be a colossal blocker for the energy transition. And certainly from what we've seen, it would make sense if there was more flexibility on who could install that meter. And I wonder if there's even a possibility to have a meter installed within the charger itself at the point of manufacture and have that hooked up, especially if the meter itself is effectively supplier agnostic. I don't know if that's something that is technically feasible just now or legally feasible just now, and if not, if that's something that potentially could be part of the change that's needed. So I know that we've got a couple of hands raised. Jamie, you first, and then Gemma, but Marianne Bull from Fife Council asks, when installing on private land, is it just a leasing arrangement or is there a revenue share as well? Now, I don't know if that necessarily relates to charging infrastructure, in which case there are definitely CPOs who do revenue share, or if it's to do with, like, for example, running a cable across that land. Marianne, if you want to clarify whether that would be with regards to the actual charging infrastructure or just the cable run. But yeah, is it just a leasing arrangement or would you expect there to be a revenue share? Who wants to take that one? Nobody. I'll tell you why. Probably because it's commercially sensitive. There will be some CPOs that probably do one, some that do the other. There we go, Marianne. For what it's worth, I've heard of both being done. It does depend on the CPO.
Sorry, can I just add there? For our leasing arrangements on Faster, there's no revenue involved because they're own and operate models. So the councils are taking the revenue that at the moment doesn't even cover the costs of operation. So there's no profit involved anyway. So especially on the more rural charges that aren't used as much. So yeah, just to clarify for this project, there's no revenue share.
Thank you, Gemma. And Jamie, we'll come back to you obviously with your comment. You had your hand raised, but Jamie, you were first. Fire on.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ewan. It was just really to flag, I think, on a couple of points that have come up, but Ryan's as well, around the coordination looking forward. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment is working with the local authorities to develop strategy expansion plans for public charging networks. So I know Gemma probably has more of the detail and is involved in some of the island ones, but we've been doing quite a lot of work with Highlands and some of the other local authorities that are involved in this as well. And I think that those provide maybe some opportunities to pick off some of the issues around, individual installs or what information has been provided to suppliers. Through those plans should inform how we work more directly, or how local authorities and us with the funding work more directly with the private sector as well. So I think it's actually a really good point, and there's probably an opportunity now for us to try and make sure that we create the chance to try and be a bit more coordinated across not just the local authority plan for installs, but across a number of local authorities, particularly when we're looking at islands, so that we can try and create a bit of scale and demand to try and influence how quickly we might get people up. And I think the EDF point, it's public utilities contracts, so I think it's tendered nationally periodically as well. So it's a a big contract, but that probably makes it difficult because it will be thousands and thousands of connections for different things over the year. But yeah, coordination and collaboration, I think, is probably the next big thing for us to try and tackle.
Absolutely, yeah. Clubbing together is going to be key on that one. And that does raise a question which is totally separate to this webinar, which is, beyond ChargePlace Scotland, when different local authorities are looking into different solutions, different back offices. Do they maintain things in-house, run them in-house? Do they go out to a third-party commercial charging network? It's going to be interesting to see how far that collaboration goes, but at least when it comes to expanding the infrastructure that's there, there's definitely merit for clubbing together on that one, strengthen numbers. Now, I'm acutely aware that Sharon has a hard stop in a couple of minutes' time. So I just want to jump to actually the final question and then come back to this one, which is gaining so much interest with the panelists. Sharon, perfect timing. I'm aware you have to run very shortly. So just kind of final thoughts from East Border region, lessons learned by the FASTER project, and what is next for East Border region with regards to either sort of life beyond FASTER project, taking it further, or just like with regards to your involvement in EV charging infrastructure. So lessons learned and what's next, basically.
Yeah, lessons learned. I suppose lessons learned for us would be relating to, you know, how different the EV charging infrastructure is in the 3 jurisdictions. And, you know, I think a lot more planning maybe needs to be done at that outset as to who the different players are, who, you know, the different specs, the different needs. You know, so like, you know, more work around that maybe. In relation to what's next, I'm not sure. We're about, you know, come the 31st of December, FASTER ends for us. You know, we are working on PEACE, the PEACE Plus programme. I'm not actually, Pamela would know more about it than me. I am not, you know, specifically working on PEACE Plus, but you know, we are working on projects within that. I'm not aware of any EV related projects being developed within that at the moment, but that's not to say that there aren't, or that some won't develop. But that's all I know for now.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
getting this one completed in time.
Yeah. True. I mean, we thank you for you know, for coming up against all these obstacles and finding ways around them. And there's been a lot of learning from this project. Although, you know, it's not necessarily been plain sailing all the time, it has definitely brought some of the local and national constraints to the attention of key personnel right the way up to Transport Scotland. So good to see that there's been that active involvement. We're aware you do need to run now, Sharon, so if you need to drop off, that's no problem. But thank you so much for your time today. And we shall take care. Gemma, just before we answer your question, your colleague Matthews mentioned in terms of change of legislation, not too sure the exact terminology legally, but I think a body such as Scottish Water has a legal statutory right to lay, access and maintain water and sewage pipes on private land. So a similar arrangement for electrical cabling supplies would hugely benefit projects such as this. Yeah, really good feedback on that. And certainly if there is a precedent that's been set by other infrastructure sectors, then it needs to be applied to electricity as well, especially because that's the way things are heading. But yeah, Gemma, please do come in.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on 2 previous points. Firstly, you'd asked Ian, you know, how the individual installs were going from SSE's point of view. And just to say, yeah, they're all on schedule. I think we've got 2 more to go, but they've not held us up. They've followed on behind Adam's team each time. So very pleased with that. And although we've obviously had challenges, Ian and I are discussing those as well. So really pleased with that. Jamie had mentioned the strategy and expansion plans and taking forward some lessons from FASTER. And I just wanted to mention one thing that both Ryan's team and Andrew's team and ourselves at HITRANS have worked on for this project was an improved maintenance package for rural and remote locations, particularly that have chargers. They particularly struggle with response times to fix faults. And Andrew's team at Scottish Power are really good at negotiating on that and understanding kind of where we were coming from and what we were asking for and why it was important. So that is something that's come about from the FASTER project that we're really pleased with as well.
Thank you. Shane Rees, who sadly had to drop off now, but he's from Chargy. He's mentioned actually at least the metering challenge is avoided for retrofitting public chargers to existing power supplies like lampposts. Obviously, that doesn't work for a rapid charger unless it was not particularly well utilized and had a big battery in it to buffer the kind of 5 or so kilowatts you would get from it. But at least it works well for on-street charging. So that's a very good point. And I'm aware of some other innovative on-street charging solutions that make use of existing metering. So it's very much a case of getting approval from the various powers that be, including local authorities and kind of national national transport organisations, not least Transport Scotland, when it comes to the likes of your Gulleys, Kerbocharge, Trojan Energy, Aon, Node and Charge Bridge, all these clever solutions where you're running a supply from the house underneath the pavement or over the pavement to the car. So yeah, very key to get approval for those, because that will expedite this process even further. Now, I am acutely aware that we are beyond our usual overrun time, let alone our usual kind of webinar time. So it would be remiss of us not to very quickly cover the outreach and stakeholder events. I want to bring in Donal for this one as well. So in Scotland, we did have a couple of stakeholder events, and we had some public outreach as well. Since I chaired the bulk of the public outreach side of things, I don't want to blow my own trumpet or anything. So yeah, first of all, we'll stick to the kind of business stakeholder events. Tell us about the frequency of those, the typical sort of topics covered, the lessons from them, and the productivity of them.
Yeah, well, as you say, Euan, we've obviously had the monthly webinars now since April of 2022. And the viewing figures, as you can see from the YouTube channel, every month we're seeing thousands upon thousands of views. And I suppose in addition to the level or the viewing numbers, it's the amount of time that people are actually spending on those, watching the recordings of these webinars, which is really positive for us. It's great to see that people are taking these as a learning tool and a resource. And that's very much, I suppose, the aspect of the project that we have been expected to deliver upon here at Southwest College. Then over the summer, we obviously had the Fort William Roadshow, and the feedback from that has been very, very positive. The response to the film that we produced from that, and we actually have another film which will be going live over the coming days, which will sort of demonstrate and document the work that the project has been doing in Scotland. So looking forward to sharing that out. But I think having those roadshow events and having members of the public engage directly with the stakeholders and with the industry panelists and those that know about these topics, it is very, very important. And that's something that, if there should be a further iteration of the FASTER project or something coming down the line, that again it should be very much focused upon, that there is that stakeholder engagement aspect. Because still, even with the survey that we're running at the moment, that is one of the things that keeps coming up in the comment sections, is that there needs to be more knowledge sharing around all of this, because it still is quite an evolving industry, and the landscape around electric vehicle use and electric vehicle infrastructure is constantly changing and developing, and it's bringing people together and sharing that knowledge, which is so important. And I think that's why the webinars in particular have really, really worked for us. Obviously, following up on the Fort William event, we had the roadshow here in Enniskillen in September, and again it was very much a similar program for the day. We looked at the sort of the myths around electric vehicle use and infrastructure. We looked at the process of buying electric vehicles, of fleet usage, and all of that. And again, we were very fortunate in that we had representatives from the infrastructure suppliers, from Weave and EasyGo, attend that. And again, just for those guys to have an opportunity to meet EV users and those people that will be using the charge points right across the regions is so important. So yeah, the outreach program has been really well received, and we're continuing to see great things from that. I suppose it's not all. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I suppose not everybody, you won't always see that. But we are trying our best as a project steering group and the partnership to really keep all aspects of the project on the road and being delivered as required by the funder, because we do have certain deliverables and certain expectations that we have to meet that may not necessarily align with public expectations or the expectations of EV users, but they are commitments that we need to make to the funder. So it's very important that we be mindful of that as well. So it's been a challenging project, as we've discussed at various points during the day, and I suppose from the stakeholder engagement side of things, there have been different challenges as well, but I think we continue to meet those. And obviously at the minute, we're working on the final stage of the project, and we'll hopefully be sharing the exact locations and site launches, and we're planning a sort of a project wrap event for stakeholders at the moment. So looking forward to that. But yeah, it's been I suppose an engaging process, but I think it's important to be mindful of the sort of deliverables and the expectations of all the stakeholders involved.
Thank you, Donal. And as I say, I'm acutely aware that everyone's staying on longer than expected. So if anyone needs to drop off, we will not be in the least bit offended. But before we all go, yeah, I suppose everyone's kind of final thoughts on the FASTER project and any kind of key lessons learned, what would be done differently next time, and plans for the future within the EV charging world. So literally just a few words from each of you, and I'll go from the top left of my screen first. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I think in terms of this project probably covered everything you probably come across really in terms of a project. The difficulties, the complexities, the number of partners involved, the weather, ferries, etc., landslides, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's been a great learning experience for many of the partners. Certainly for Scottish Power, it's been great to be involved in it. I think it's worked very well in terms of the confines of what we're required to work within. I think lessons learned is just preparation, and everything's preparation from all parties in terms of getting things organised, getting timelines, and I think in most cases that's worked very well. But just in terms of preparation and flexibility as well, and I think from our contractor, it's been great. That's a really good flexibility in terms of moving around, staying on site, doing weekends and everything like that. And it's been really good. So in that respect, I welcome working on a similar project again. I think a lot of the things that we have learned we can apply again, and looking forward to at the same time looking forward to the end of it, and getting these available for the public, which is ultimately the name of the game. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And the logical next person to bring in, of course, would be Adam.
Yep. Well, Andrew covered off probably the same points we had to say. It's been a pleasure doing it. It's been good to be involved and working with all the partners and engaging with the community as well, and everybody around about. It's good to see, spreading some to these areas that sometimes suffer from gaining from these benefits. So, no, enjoyed it thoroughly, and hopefully looking forward to trying and do future installs as well.
Excellent. And Ian.
Yeah, I think my key one would be early engagement, communication, and making sure everyone's involved throughout the project. Often that's lost. So having regular meetings, regular calls throughout, so everyone knows what's happening, involving your meter installer, getting someone represented on the call, make sure that dates are being adhered to, highlighting any issues at an early date, making sure these are being resolved in time, and with a focus on when things are needing done. Rather than delaying that and then you miss your connection date and then there's a rescheduling of staff, etc. So let's get it right first time. So early engagement for that, get the correct quote out, get that accepted quickly, get things into delivery, get all the consents in place. So just making sure that process is as short as possible. But yeah, happy to be involved in any other projects that come our way.
Superb. I hope that EDF was listening to your wise words there as well. Gemma.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed working on the project, and I think it's been great to work with so many knowledgeable people on this as well. And certainly when you hit challenges, it makes all the difference to know that the team around you pull together and solve those challenges together. I think one of the biggest things for me is the inclusivity of the project, being able to put in charges for rural and remote communities to ensure they get access, and that we try and solve some of the challenges that they're facing, and to make sure that chargers and charging bays are designed to suit all users, not just the majority.
Very, very true. And of course, crucially, Transport Scotland. And before we get the answers from the peer review, Jamie, you very kindly mentioned on the chat that you're going to investigate with the SG Energy team to see if there's been any thought on this, because there's a possibility that EV charging might be considered a bit more flexible than telecoms or water supplies. So if there's a way that can be deemed an even more vital piece of national infrastructure that would just help that whole planning process to be that bit smoother, that would be amazing. So great that one of the outcomes of this webinar is that key personnel from Transport Scotland are actively taking away some of the bottlenecks that have been raised and looking into it. So thank you so much for that. And on that note, Jamie, we'll come to you, and then Judy, of course. But Jamie, any final words?
Yeah, thanks, Euan. I think the one thing I might add, just as a bit of a takeaway, is it's really interesting seeing what happens through the project, but it's incredible, and it's been mentioned, it's incredible how long it takes for some of these things to happen. And it's the amount of things and work that has been done, and the amount of shift in the policy and the operating environment across, and of course public finances as well, but across, I'm sure, not just Scotland, but all the regions, that I think my takeaway would probably be trying to be a bit more, I don't know if creative's the right word, but trying to sort of horizon scan or look a bit more directly at what might be coming from government in terms of policy, and from the types of the funding and operational landscape from the private sector as well at the outset of something like this, because I think there's quite a lot that because we've worked closely together, we're able to learn and sort of take from the project. But it would be quite easy just to have set out as we planned 4 or 5 years ago, delivered the project, and not necessarily have started thinking about how these chargers adapt and develop as part of the network that will be brought into the likes of EVIF, the infrastructure funded projects in the future. So I think it's trying to work out how we can better move with the change in policy and funding landscapes in projects that do take a few years to deliver.
Well said. And last but not least, Judy.
Hi, Euan. The FASTER project it's benefited everyone by the new insights and the skills, and Gemma was relatively new, I think, to EV infrastructure when she came in, so she shared some of her knowledge and experience going through the project. And for example, the timelines and the processes, I think everything takes so much longer. So I don't know whether Gemma remembers creating a document and timelines, in which has been shared in forums and as part of our EV infrastructure guidance. Also, the work that PNDC did, they were able to share the work they were doing on the project to colleagues within Transport Scotland. So we've really learned a lot from the project as it's progressed. And yes, these projects, they take a lot longer than what we expect. So well done. We're almost there at the finish line. So thank you.
And thank you all. Yeah, this has been even more insightful as a webinar than I'd expected, and I knew there were going to be some very knowledgeable people here. So yeah, despite the unfortunate absence of the local authorities, although proper props to Anne David, who's been providing some brilliant comments in the chat. I believe the transcript of the chat will be available on the YouTube recording, won't it, Donal? Normally is, or am I getting mixed up? Yeah, it will be. Excellent. He's nodding away. A couple of very, very quick questions that have come in, because all the panelists have been great and answered all the questions live, which is amazing. But a couple of questions that were emailed into us beforehand, and to be honest, they're aimed more at Transport Scotland. So Jamie and Judy, particularly for yourselves. Someone's mentioned they would like to see, actually it was Ian Robinson had mentioned, he's up in Shetland. He wants to see better access provided to all Charge Place Scotland EV chargers. We're talking about from a mobility accessibility perspective, basically, along the lines of what Gemma's been working very hard on in the FASTER project installations. Unfortunately, the Shetland Islands were not part of the FASTER project, but there are serious issues with some EV charging spaces being on very steep slopes or against solid walls with very little space between the EV and the charge point. So if you are in a wheelchair or have heavily restricted mobility, you're going to struggle to access those charge points in the first place. So yeah, he strongly advocates for all ChargePlace Scotland recharging spaces to be given additional space for disabled drivers to move around their vehicle. Why should a disabled driver be limited as to which chargers they can use safely? And I can tell you now that Kate Tyrrell and ChargeSafe team would definitely agree with that. Transport Scotland, arguably, although such is the nature of the ChargePlace Scotland network, it's heavily decentralised with a centralised back office. Are you going to be advocating and mandating past 1899 legislation, your disability access to the charging infrastructure, and making sure that that is a key requirement of any public charging infrastructure, regardless of who's installing it? Is that going to become part of the legislation?
I think it's much more difficult to say in terms of legislation. Obviously, it's guidance, and that's been published by UK government. What we've got on our side is the work that we're doing on the EV infrastructure fund side. So as part of that, Gemma is involved in the work with the Highlands on developing their strategy and expansion plan, and we review that along with colleagues from Energy Savings Trust and Scottish Futures Trust and feedback. And one of the key points that's in that is accessibility and how people are accommodating different vehicle types and different abilities of drivers. And it just, in the vision that was published by Scottish Government earlier this year, accessibility is a key sort of theme and priority within the public EV charging vision for Scotland now. And I think one of the things that we're looking to do, we've got the sort of last big tranche of national funding through the EV infrastructure fund, and part of, or the ethos of that really is about providing funding for areas that the private sector won't invest in. But it's not just about necessarily a specific type of charging or a specific location. It's about trying to make sure that the charging network that is developed, supported through that fund, is accessible to everyone and works for everybody that needs it. There's also other things that we're trying to do a bit more on, which may be related and help some of this by bringing in types of fleet users and fleet charging that might provide a bit more accessibility. And there was the legislation that was brought in around providing public charging in car parks of a certain size for new developments or major redevelopments through building control. That doesn't specify the blue badge spaces, but obviously as those things develop, that's something I would expect that will be considered going forward.
Thank you, Jamie. Gemma, you got your hand raised on that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's my understanding that the PAS guidance feeds into sort of future British standards, and I know there is a push to sort of get PAS guidance into regulation, but it also needs time to bed in for people to try it out and for us to learn lessons from it. And also a large part of accessibility is going to have to come from charger manufacturers, and they need time to redesign their chargers or their software or the hardware to bring it up in line with the sort of physical constraints in accessibility as well. So it's not a quick solution, but I think there's real progress being made.
That's really good feedback, that. And I'd also recommend to any CPOs and local authorities and anyone who's installing charging infrastructure. Sorry, acronym police, charge point operator, CPO, for anyone who's not familiar. Yeah, any of them to reach out, not just to the likes of Gemma within the Faster project. You've got experience of looking into and trying to make the most of a limited space to make it as accessible as possible, and not just the likes of ChargeSafe, who are consultants who specialize in this, but also the Charge to Access, that's like number 2 Access Facebook group, which is full of people who have mobility impairments who drive EVs. And the feedback that they give on real world installations is brutally honest. So I think that is important for all CPOs to be looking at this. InstaVolt has a target on their back, by the way. Oh my God. So yeah, seriously, check it out, because it's valuable feedback from people who are completely dependent on spaces being accessible. So I think that is absolutely key. And it's great to see you're nodding your head there, Andrew, because obviously key for Scottish Power's own charging network rollout there as well. I mean, that's just a font of knowledge, and they are keen to engage. So yeah, final question, and then we can all go for our lunch now. I apologize for keeping you as long as you have. And if you do need to drop off, again, not offended in the slightest, because you've put in some shift. But the final question comes from Norrie Hunter from EVA Scotland. And he says, and again, this is probably more of a Transport Scotland thing, which organisation is responsible for dealing with and penalising EV drivers and others who leave their cars in charging station parking bays actually technically that should be EV charging bays, over the prescribed time. So this is probably covering icing, EV holding, so parking but not charging, and then overstaying where you're using a rapid charger as long stay parking effectively. He recounts a recent incident that involved charging in a Scottish Borders Council charging bay. I know that Euan Doyle from Scottish Borders was on earlier. He's had to drop off, which is a shame because it would have been good to get his thoughts on it. But yeah, so basically he'd contacted Scottish Borders Council about this car that had well and truly overstayed on this rapid charger. It was there for way longer than it should have been. And he had to kind of park on the grass verge to try and get a charge he desperately needed. Scottish Borders Council said it was Charge Place Scotland's responsibility. Charge Place Scotland said it was the council's responsibility. So Jamie, tell me, how can we tackle this scourge of icing and overstaying once and for all?
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute. It's a tricky one. I think it's more on the front of the likes of local authorities, because it's traffic regulation in terms of the sort of legislative powers to deal with something like this. Traffic regulation orders, because that controls what can and can't be done. Local authorities obviously have different powers to private sector in terms of what they can do to enforce parking, which it is effectively, it's use of parking spaces. I think the other option is much the same as what we see. I genuinely don't know. I know there's some good innovative solutions, but I think the other option is just how CPOs charge people for using the network. Obviously, you are signing an agreement when you plug in and charge, and that agreement should include overstays or anything else. So obviously CPS has overstay charges applied, excuse me, from the local authority perspective, but it's a really difficult one because I think, like Gemma said, a lot of this is quite new, and some of these issues are starting to become more prevalent as the number of people using charging networks and the number of spaces taken up by EV charging start to increase. So I think it's something that we'll see more innovation around. I know that there's things like sensors that have been trialed in the likes of East Lothian, where you can tell if someone's parked in a bay but not charging, and that can alert either traffic wardens or potentially someone to go and check if it's someone who needs assistance in connecting the charger. So I think it's probably a combination of local authority being able to apply some kind of enforcement, but also more innovative solutions and developments by charge point operators to try and make sure people are using charge points responsibly.
On that note, in terms of those innovations, is Transport Scotland actively trying to support those or make local authorities aware of them, or provide any guidance on which solutions to kind of look into at this stage, or are you kind of staying neutral on this one?
We're not promoting specific solutions. I think we have supported some of them in the past, but it's not something that we've put a huge amount of funding into as part of a big project. It tends to be parts of a project where we're installing something and there's different things done. I think Ryan and the team at BNDC have done some work on some of these things as well. But I think, again, it's the kind of thing that we would encourage people to look at as part of the EVIF project, because that's something that we could help support, and we would add a bit of strength to the project requests for funding, where they're looking at trying to solve some of the issues. Probably very geographic. It's the kind of thing that you can't necessarily do across the whole suite, but there's probably areas where it's more of an acute issue, where it would be worth putting something extra in.
Coincidentally, shameless plug here, I am actually working on a very clever, very novel, totally different to anything else that's been done before, anti-icing solution that can literally be deployed anywhere. So call me. But Gemma, you've got your hand raised.
I just wanted to add that this is something that was looked at on the FASTER project. So the Raption is often provided with the 2 DC connectors and 1 AC connector. And the AC charging often takes a few hours rather than the sort of 45 minutes that the DC charging takes. And that made it very difficult for councils to govern. They couldn't apply overstay charges, and they can't tell people they've overstayed because it was a mixed use charger. So we did specify in Scotland on the FASTER project that the AC be disabled. It's largely a legacy connector now anyway, but it means that from a user point of view, from encouraging that right behaviour and for councils to be able to govern their own assets, that was the decision that was made.
Yeah, and I must admit that I did, although I wasn't involved in the technical side of the FASTER project, I did passionately state my case that there shouldn't be AC on those rapid chargers, because the Renault Zoe lost the format war for AC only rapid charging, and too often now we just see plug-in hybrids sipping 3 kilowatts through a straw on a 22 kilowatt socket or a 43 kilowatt plug, and it does block the rapid charger for anyone else trying to use it, even if it can supply AC and DC simultaneously, like the Swarco Raption 50 can, as per the one that's been installed by the Faster project. Due to the position of sockets on different makes and models of vehicle and cable reach, and some people who spread eagle across both charging bays when they're using a rapid charger, there's a chance that even if the DC is available, if someone is using the AC, you physically can't use the DC because you can't reach it. So that was a sensible move to decommission the AC on that. It'd be nice if they were physically blocked off, but I get that it was one of those strange ironies of mass production that it was actually cheaper and easier and quicker to get one with the AC socket built in than to request some that didn't have the socket. It's a bit like how you get some vans when you're driving along and you've got a van in front of you and it's got completely blanked off rear windows, but it's still got a windscreen wiper because it went through the same production line as the version that had the windows. It's like, yeah, it's that kind of idea, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, we are out of time and then some. Thank you all of our wonderful, wonderful panelists. I shall run through you all again. So we have Andrew Brown, Scottish Power. We have Jamie Dunsmore and Judy Moore, Transport Scotland. We have Pamela Arthurs and Sharon Digby, East Border Region. Ian Jessamine, SSEN. Ryan Sims, University of Strathclyde. Adam Wright, Everwarm. And of course, Gemma Robinson from HITRANS. If I've missed anyone, I do apologise because there were loads of us. We will be back next month for a double header. So Wednesday, 22nd of November. So usual date and time, Wednesday, 10 a.m. We're going to be looking at how the project has panned out in the Republic of Ireland. And then the very next day, so Thursday, the 23rd of November, a Thursday, a bit unusual for us, I know, but Thursday, 23rd of November, 10 a.m. again, it's the grand finale. How did the project pan out in the area that arguably needs charging infrastructure, particularly rapid chargers, the most? Northern Ireland. It's the place where we've seen the biggest just hurdles, and not so much resistance. I wouldn't say resistance, but just so many hurdles to putting in rapid charging infrastructure. Could the Faster project finally resolve this once and for all? We will have the stakeholders along with us to find out more. Thank you again, everybody. This has been great, really informative, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next month. Take care.
Thank you.